Alright, now we're going to move on to a bigger project. We're going to create our own little house. In order to do that, first we need some sort of design for the house. So let's load in a picture from the reference folder on the DVD by stretching over the UV image window, going to the image menu, selecting open image, and navigate to the references folder on your DVD and select tune_house. So here's the little house that we're going to create. We're going to start by drawing the front of the house, and then we're going to extrude that backward for depth. Then we're going to create all the planks on the roof, and then all the rest of the details will follow. So let's start off by drawing the profile of the front of the house. I'm going to leave the front of the house visible in the image window and create as much space as I can for the 3D view here. And I'm going to delete the default cube, and in front orthographic view, going to press Shift and A and add a mesh plane. You'll notice that every time you add an object though, it's always facing that direction. Like when I add a plane in front view, I kind of want to be facing the plane. I don't want to be facing the side of the plane. Now we can fix that. We can go to the File menu and User Preferences, and under the Interface tab, let's see, where is this option? Editing tab, there it is. Under the Editing tab in the User Preferences, under the Align To option, select View instead of World. That way everything you add from the Add menu will be aligned to the view that you're in instead of the world axis. So change that and save user settings and close user preferences. Now let's delete that default plane. Let's delete that plane. Press X, select delete. Go back in front view. Press Shift and A again and add a mesh plane. There we go. That's what I wanted. So here's the start of the front of our house. I'm going to use this red line as a guide. That's going to be our ground. So I'm going to move the plane up one blender unit and press Tab to go into edit mode. I'm going to delete the top two vertices so that we're just left with these two vertices and that one edge between them. Now we're just going to draw a line. We're just going to use the E key to extrude vertex after vertex and draw the profile of the front of the house. Then we're going to add the door frame and the window frames, and then we're going to make it all solid. And now I'm going to move this one vertex to the left on the x-axis and press E to extrude it. I'm going to extrude it straight up on the z-axis, and I'm just going to keep pressing E as I draw the profile of the house. And it gets a little bit sharper up at the top here. Now we're going to start coming back down. And this won't be perfect. We're definitely going to have to edit this afterward. But we're just getting the basic shape down. Now we're going to come up a little bit at the end here. And I'm going to select these two vertices. Actually, I'm going to delete. I'm going to select these two vertices and press the F key to create an edge between them. Move that over a little bit. Right side of the house definitely has a little bit of a slant going on. So here's the shape we have so far, and it's definitely not perfect. In fact, it looks a bit squished. So I'm going to select all vertices by pressing the A key, and when they're all selected, press the S key and then the X key to scale it on the x-axis. And that looks a lot better, but I still think this part here needs to be sharper. So now I'm just going to play with all the vertices that I've added until the shape of the house is exactly how I want it to be. I'm going to move them all down. I think the house is a little bit too tall. I'm going to move this to the right a little. Alright, that's looking a lot better. Alright, I'm going to call that perfect. So once you have the outline of your house made, I'm going to go through now and refine these edges so that the curve is much more smooth. And you can see on the right side of the house here that it's not a straight line. It does have a bit of a curve to it. And just to remind you, to navigate in the 3D to navigate in the image window, it's the same as navigating the 3D view. You can use the mouse wheel to to zoom in and out. You can click the middle mouse button to pan it around. And to get the image at its full size, you can press numpad 1, and that will display it at its full size. Alright, so back to the outline. Let's smooth this out by taking all of these edges and subdividing them. Let's start with the right side. Select the top and bottom vertex of the right side, press the W key, and select the option Subdivide. That took that one edge and it split it into two by adding a vertex in the middle. So I'm going to move that vertex to the left a little to start our curve. I'm going to move that to the left a little bit too. And now I'm going to select all three of those vertices, press W key, and select Subdivide again. So that split all of those edges into more edges. And tab out to see how the outline looks, and that looks better. And now let's make the curve of the top of the house more smooth by subdividing all these edges. So I'm just going to select all the vertices on the top of the house, press the W key, and select Subdivide. Now we have a lot more vertices to work with here. So let's zoom in and start smoothing things out. So just wherever you see a sharp edge, move the vertex there to make that curve smooth. There, that looks perfect. Now let's move on to creating the door frame and the window frames. So back into edit mode, I'm going to select the two bottom vertices there, press W and subdivide them once, and then press W again and subdivide it a second time. Now the two vertices on the left here, I'm going to select them, press X, and delete that edge by selecting Edges. I'm going to select those two vertices again. I'm going to move them over to the left, constrained to the X-axis, and our window is going to be centered right about there. So we're going to center our doorway there as well. So move it to the right a little bit. I think the door frame's a little bit wide, so I'm going to press the S key, scale that down a little. Now press the E key and then the Z key to move it straight up, and then press the F key to make an edge there. There's our door frame. Now let's shape it a little bit. I'm going to select all of these, press S and then X to squish it a little bit more. I think it's too wide. Right about there. I'm going to zoom into the door here, and most of the shape of the door is going to be made by the planks that we're going to create, that we're going to use for the door frame. So we just need to create the general shape. It goes straight up, and then it goes up, and then it goes to the right and up a little bit at the top of the door, and it looks like it comes straight down. So I'm going to select the top right vertex and just move it up a little, just like that. Now, while still in front view, I'm going to place the cursor where this window frame should be. So right about there. Press Shift and A and add a mesh circle. Press the T key for the side toolbar, and under vertices, make sure the vertex count is at 14. Here we can change the number of vertices our window is going to be. So as soon as you add the mesh circle, go into the toolbar and the options at the bottom here, and you can play with the amount of vertices the window has, and 14 is a good amount of vertices for the window to have. So press the T key again to hide that menu, or hide that toolbar. And now let's scale this down a little, because this is going to be a small window. And let's place it exactly where we want it to be. That looks good. Now press Shift and D to duplicate that. Let's move it up to be our top window. Press the S key to scale it up. Right about there. Okay. Now we added the holes for the door and the windows. Now what we're going to do is add faces in between all of these vertices and edges, because right now all we have are lines. So press the A key a couple times until all of the vertices are selected, and then just simply press Alt and F, and it will add faces in between everything. It will autofill in between all of the edges. Now we have a solid front panel for the house. Now what we're going to do is extrude this back to give the house some depth. But I don't want to extrude the windows or the door frames back, because I don't want the back of the house to have any windows or doors. It's just going to be a flat panel. So I'm going to press the C key, or press the A key so that nothing's selected. Then press the C key for circle select. And I'm going to go around and just select all of the outside vertices of the house. Whoops, I don't want these bottom ones here, so I'm going to press the B key, hold Alt, left click and drag around them. I just want the ones on the outside. None of the inside vertices should be selected. You'll see a problem. I just want the outside vertices selected, but over here it selected all of these faces as well, since they're all connected to each other here. And we can solve this problem by going into Edge Select mode. So in the header of the 3D view, down here, these three options here are the selection modes. Right now, the default is Vertex Select. If you click on the one to the right of that, it's called Edge Select. Now we can select only edges, and it won't select faces. But since all of these edges are still selected, the faces are selected as well. So we're going to zoom in real close to this area, press the C key for circle select, hold Alt because we're going to deselect, and just left click on all of the interior edges there, just like that. So use circle select, hold Alt, and left click on all of the inside edges. So now you'll see we have only the outside edges selected. Now let's go in side view. Press the E key and then the Y key to constrain it to the Y-axis. Just move it to the right about the thickness of the house that you want. And that's a little bit too thick. So press the G key. I'm going to move it to the left a little. Still a little bit too thick. So just play with it until you get a thickness you like. La la la. Alright, that looks good to me. Now the back side of the house is completely empty. We're going to fix that. So let's go back into Vertex Select mode by selecting that icon in the header. And we have to, in order to autofill this whole area, we have to close the loop. There's this gap at the bottom, so autofill won't work with it. If you press Alt and F, nothing's going to happen. So if you simply select the bottom vertices there, press the F key to close that loop. Now hold Alt and right click on that edge, or right click on the side edge there. It's going to select the whole back outline of the house. So again, hold Alt, right click on an edge of the side of the house, and it selects all of the edges connected to it. Now let's try Alt and F again. So press Alt and F to autofill, and there we go. So there's the basic building block of our house. Now the fun stuff is definitely in the details. I'm going to go back into tab mode, and with the back of the house still selected, I'm going to make it wider again. Or add more depth, I mean. Alright. Now we have the basic shape of the house finished. Next, we're going to move on to adding planks for the rooftop. And we're going to do that by creating one plank, and then using a couple of layers to duplicate that plank and have it follow a curve along the top of the house. This part's going to be fun. Now to create the planks for the roof, the first thing we're going to need is a plank. So let's go into top view and wireframe view. And while we're in object mode, because we want this to be separate from the house, press Shift and A and add a mesh plane. In edit mode, I'm going to squish this in this direction by pressing S then X, and I'm going to shrink it down to the width of the plank that I want. Then I'm going to move it up on the Y-axis to the center of the house, and I'm going to stretch it on the Y-axis. And I'm going to stretch it a little bit longer than the house because I want a little bit of an overhang on both sides. So something like that. I'm going to zoom in a little and just center it a little bit better. Alright, there we go. Now in front view, I'm going to zoom in, press the E key to extrude, hold Control to snap, and move it up 0.1 blender units. And there's our plank. Now to get this plank all around the roof, to do it manually would mean to duplicate it about 20 times and manually place each plank and rotate it to fit the curve of the roof. But that's tedious and it takes way more time than it has to. So we're going to use a couple of fancy tricks. We're going to use two modifiers. One is called the array modifier, which is going to duplicate our plank for us. And the other is called a curve modifier, which is going to make all of the planks follow the curve of the roof. So the first thing we need to do is create a curve object, which is basically going to be a path that all of the planks follow. And the path is going to be the same shape as the rooftop here. So since we've already drawn this rooftop, we're just going to borrow the edges from one of the profiles and we're going to turn that into a curve. So to do that, let's select all the edges, and we only want the edges. Make sure you don't select any faces. And we can do that by going into Edge Select mode. So down in the header of the 3D view, enable Edge Select, and now we can simply select only the edges. So I'm going to go to the back of the house, and in solid shaded view, because it's easier to see the corner of the house here, I'm going to start by selecting the top left corner edge and hold Shift, and I'm just going to continue selecting all the edges on the rim of the back profile, being very careful to only select these edges. And rotate the view if you need to, because you might get a better angle to help you select the edges. And I'm going to select down to about there. I'm not going to select this bottom edge here because the rooftop planks don't go all the way down to the ground. So I'm going to stop there. So once you have all of these edges selected, press the P key and choose Selection. And the P key is going to separate all of those edges from this object and make it its own object. So press the P key and select Selection, and it disappears. It's now separated from this object. So press Tab to get out of edit mode and into object mode. And although we can't see the curve that's there, that we separated, we know it's there. So just right click in that vicinity, and there we go. Now we selected that curve. Well, this isn't actually a curve yet. it's still a mesh, but we're going to convert it into a curve. But first, it's a little bit jagged, and I want to smooth these edges out a little. So to do that, I'm going to add a subsurf modifier on level 2. So let's stretch the properties window over and go to the modifiers tab, which is the wrench icon, and add the modifier subdivision surface, and change view subdivisions from 1 to 2. Now you'll see that line is perfectly smooth all the way around. Now, click on the Apply button under the subsurf modifier, and it actually applies all the modifications to it. Now if you go into edit mode, well, we're still in edge select, so go into edit mode and then go down and enable vertex select. You'll see all of these vertices are now here. That's what happens when we apply a subsurf modifier. It adds all that extra detail to the mesh. So now that we have a smooth mesh curve, let's convert this into an actual curve so we can use it as a path. So with that line selected, press Alt and C. This is the Convert To menu. Now we want to convert this to a curve from a mesh, so select that top option. Alright, now it's a curve object. Doesn't look any different, does it? But if you go into edit mode and you zoom in, you'll see all of the vertices now have these lines sticking out from them. That's showing you that this curve can now be used as a path. So, in top view, just for the sake of being able to see this thing, I'm going to move this down on the y-axis to the center of the house, just so it's not hidden in with the house profile. Now we're going to make this plank into about 20 planks and have them all follow the curve that we just created. Be a very easy way to place all these planks on the rooftop. So now with the plank selected, let's add the first modifier, which is going to be the array modifier. So go into the modifiers tab, select add modifier, and under the generate modifiers, select array. You'll see as soon as you do that, it creates a duplicate of the plank and it moves it next to the original plank. You can change the number of planks that it creates by changing the count number here. So let's click on the right arrow, change the count to 10, and now we have 10 planks. But in solid shaded view, you'll see there's no space between them. There are offset fields here, which define how much space is between each of the duplicates. So change it from 1.0 to 1.05. And there we have it. There's a little bit of space between the planks, which we would naturally have. So now we can focus on making these planks follow the curved path we just made. To do that, we're going to add a curve modifier to the planks that target this curve so that it can follow it. So let's minimize the array modifier by clicking on the arrow in the top left corner and select add modifier again. This time choose the deform modifier curve. Now in the curve modifier, there's a field here called object. This is the target object that the planks will follow as a path. If you left click on that, it's going to give you a list of all the curves in your scene. Since we only have one curve in the scene, we know that the one listed must be the one that we want. So left click on that one, and you'll see something happen. It looks like it's trying to follow the curve, and it is, but it's not quite aligned properly. And if you press G to move it around, you'll see you could probably align that just by sight. But we're not going to do that. See, the problem is, when you go into edit mode of the planks, the original plank mesh, all those vertices, has to be centered on the origin of the curve. So let's see what we can do here. Let's select the curve, and you can see the origin point, this orange dot, is at the base of the house. So let's place the cursor there. So press Shift and S for the snap menu, and choose Cursor to Selected. Now we just place the cursor at the origin point of the curve. Now select the planks, and in front view, go into edit mode, and let's simply select all of the vertices and move them down right where the 3D cursor is. And now press tab to get out of edit mode, and in front view you'll see now it's aligned a lot better. Now let's go into top view, and this isn't aligned, but we can simply press the G key and move this down on the y-axis right to where we want it. And there we have it. Go into wireframe view just to make sure this is all aligned properly, and you can see that the planks are kind of going into the house. We don't want that, so in edit mode, select all the vertices of the plank, and move it up on the z-axis just a little bit. Now tab out. Whoops, looks like we moved it in the wrong direction. Oh, we can actually move it in object mode. So sorry about that. Stay in object mode, press the G key, then the Z key, and just move it until it's aligned to the surface of the roof, like that. Looks good. So again, if it's not aligned completely perfectly, we want to go into edit mode and get the vertices as close to the origin of the curve as we can. Then in object mode, you can move it around until it sits perfectly on the rooftop. Now we can worry about finishing the roof off. So let's expand the array modifier again, and just increase the count until it finishes the roof. So my count ended up at around 30. Now if you check the bottom of the roof planks over here on the left side of the house, they start to fan out a little at the very bottom. We can create that by modifying the curve that we made. So select the curve, go into edit mode, and select the bottom vertex, and in front view let's just stretch this down and move it out like that, and select the next vertex up. Let's do the same. There we go. So I just modified the curve to have this little fan out at the bottom, and now the planks follow it out. Now, there's one thing I don't like. It's that the planks are kind of jagged. They create all these different angles instead of being very smooth. We can fix that by going into edit mode, zooming in to all the vertices. So press Ctrl and R and mouse over the top edge, and you'll have a vertical line. Then use the scroll wheel on your mouse and scroll up until you have 12 cuts. And you can see the number of cuts by going to the bottom left of the 3D view. There's some information there, and it says number of cuts 12. So left click, and now we can move these kind of anywhere on the mesh we want, but you can right click to make sure everything stays centered. So you can see what it did. We added 12 cuts in that one plank of wood. Now that's more detail for the curve to work with when it's going around the roof. So get out of edit mode and let's take a look. There we go. You can see a nice soft curve going through all the planks, following the curve perfectly. Very good. But you can see all those angles that were created from following the curve have given it some solid shape, have given it this faceted look. You can see all the faces on the top of the plank. So let's smooth that out by pressing the T key for the side toolbar, and under the shading options, select Smooth. Out the whole plank, even all the 90-degree edges. We can fix that by adding something we've used before, the edge split modifier. So I'm going to minimize the modifiers we've added so far, go into the Add Modifier menu again, and select Edge Split. We don't even have to change any of the settings. Now it's smoothed, and it's smoothed every angle that's below 30 degrees, leaving our 90-degree angles to be sharp. And that does it for the rooftop. Now that we're finished the roof, let's create the window frames. We're going to create the window frames out of a torus, and then we're going to create the cross beams, which go vertical and horizontal, and then the window pane itself. So let's select the house object, and in edit mode, zoom in to the top window here, hold Alt and right click on one of those edges until it selects all of the vertices of the window. Press Shift and S for the Snap To menu and select Cursor to Selected. So that places the cursor directly in the center of the window. Now press Tab to go back into object mode, and in front view, press Shift and A to add a mesh torus. Basically a donut. And that actually is a pretty decent size right off the bat. I'm just going to go into edit mode and scale that down a little bit. And you can change the thickness of the torus by selecting all of the vertices and pressing Alt and S, which is a tool called Shrink and Fatten. So use the S key to scale it to where you want it to be, and use the Alt and S key to shrink it or fatten it to the thickness you want it to be. So I'm thinking that looks about right to me. I'm going to flatten this a little bit by going into top view and in edit mode, press S and then Y. There we go. So just make sure that the torus covers the window cutout. So the window cutout should be inside the torus, as seen like that. Now press the T key, the side toolbar, and press Smooth Shading. Now I'm not quite happy with this as a perfect circle, as a perfect ring. So I'm going to modify it and just give it a little bit of variety by going into edit mode and pressing the O key, which enables something called proportional vertex editing. And let me show you how that works real quick. If I select one of the vertices, I press the G key to move it. Proportional vertex editing selects and moves all of the vertices around it within a certain radius. So it's a really useful tool for adding some quick variety and modifications to an object. And you can see the white circle there is the radius, and that defines which vertices will be affected. You can make the radius bigger or smaller by using the scroll wheel on the mouse. So if you scroll up and down, you can make it bigger or smaller. Now I'm going to pull a few vertices here and there just to give this a bit of a different shape. Just so that it's not quite as perfect as it was when we created it. But don't make it too ridiculous. Don't make it too random. We just want it to be imperfect. So select a vertex here and there, and with proportional vertex editing turned on, press the G key and just move it around a little. Alright, that looks fine to me. Now, back in object mode, select that window frame. Press Shift and D. Let's move it down to the other window. And back in edit mode, let's scale that down until it fits over the window cutout. And I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees just so that it doesn't look exactly the same as the top one. And I might pull a few vertices here and there to make this shape a little bit different. Alright, there we go. Now let's create the cross beams for both windows, which are basically just going to be cylinders. So select the top window frame there, and let's recenter the cursor at the center of that window by pressing Shift and S and choose Cursor to Selected. And in top view, add a mesh cylinder. And in front view, let's shrink that down. We still have proportional vertex editing turned on, so let's turn that off by pressing the O key again. And let's shrink that down to be the thickness of our crossbeam. And let's press S and then Z and scale it up on the Z axis so that it goes into the torus. Just like that. And right now it has solid shading, so press the T key to get the side toolbar again and press smooth shading. Now in top view, I don't want this to be perfectly circular. So press S and then Y to squish it on the Y axis a little. And now in front view, press Shift and D while still in edit mode. Then right click to keep it in the same spot. And then press the R key to rotate it. And while holding Control, rotate it perfectly 90 degrees. Tab out of edit mode to see how it looks. And I'm not too big on this intersection here. It looks very strange. So back in edit mode, go into top view, and I'm going to move it back on the y-axis just a little bit. You can see I moved it back about halfway. Now the intersection should look better. Now the shading on the cylinders looks a little weird. I suspect this is because it has faces on the end. They're not open cylinders. We can check that by working with this object and this object alone. Now in order to bring this object into its own view, you press the backslash key on the numpad. Once you press that, it takes it into something called local view. And that's where only the objects that are selected can be seen. So if we take a look at our cylinders now, you can see there is indeed a cap on the top and bottom of each cylinder. So in edit mode, let's simply select all the vertices at the top of the cylinder, press the X key, and select faces. So we just deleted the faces at the top of the cylinder. Do the same for the bottom of the cylinder. And now the shading on that one beam is perfect. Do the same with the other one. Go into edit mode, select all the vertices on the right side, press X, select faces, do the same to the left side. Now we have two cylinders that are open on the ends and that are smooth shaded. Now to get back into the regular view, press the backslash on the numpad again. And there we go. Now let's select those Press Shift and D and move it down to the other window. Now it's a little bit too big for it, so I'm going to go into edit mode and I'm just going to move the vertices so that they're inside of the window frame. Alright, now we're getting somewhere. Now it's starting to look like a house. Now we got to add the window panes. So with the cursor still centered in the center of the window frame, as it still is, press Shift and A and add a mesh circle. In edit mode of the circle, let's scale it down so that it's inside the window frame, and then press the F key to make that a solid face. We're going to have to move it a little bit. So let's go in top view and move it back on the y-axis a little bit so that it's halfway into the horizontal beam. So in front view, it should look like this. So the circle is behind both of the beams, sort of intersecting the horizontal beam. Perfect. Now in front view, with that circle selected, press Shift and D to duplicate and move it down to the other window. Press S to scale it so that it's inside the window frame. Alright, that does it for the windows. Now let's move on to the door frame and the door itself. In front view, I'm going to select the vertices that form the door frame, or the doorway. Press Shift and S, and select Cursor to Selected to center the cursor in the center of the doorway. And back in object mode, press Shift and A and add a mesh plane. And now let's just draw this this one plank on the left side of the doorway. Then we'll do the top plank, and then we'll do the right plank. So I'm going to move these vertices down here like that, and I'm going to extrude it up a couple of times, and I'm going to scale it in at the top because it gets smaller as it goes up higher. I'm going to give it more of a curve on the inside like that, and that looks about right. Yeah, something like that. Now, it has a much smoother curve here, and as you can see, it's kind of jagged since we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 edges going horizontally there. So we can fix that by simply pressing Ctrl and R, adding a loop cut there, and move it so that it smooths it out. Press Ctrl and R, add a loop cut there, move it to the left a little so we get a bit of a curve going, and do the same with the rest. Wherever you think you should add more curvature, press Ctrl and R to add a loop cut there. Alright, that looks good enough to me. Now with all the vertices selected, go into top view, and it's getting a little bit crowded here, so I'm going to hide some things. Or I'm going to start putting things into layers. So I'm going to select everything and then press the B key for border select. Hold Alt, left click, and drag over just the plank for the door frame and the house object so that just the roof and the window stuff is all selected. Now press the M key to move it to a new layer. Let's move that to the second layer. So left click on the second layer there. Alright, so now in the first layer all that's left is the door frame plank and the whole house object. Let's select the plank again and go back into top view, and in edit mode Select all of the vertices, and I'm going to move it down just a little bit, and then press E to extrude it into the house a little bit. So you can see the doorway on the house cuts through the center of the plank. That's exactly what we want. Now press the T key for the toolbar on the left and press smooth shading. And again, we got some 90-degree angles that we want to make them sharp again. So add the modifier edge split once more. So add modifier, select edge split, and that leaves our sharp angle sharp but smooths everything else. Now in front view, let's get rid of that toolbar. Let's work on the top plank of the door frame now. We can't really see it. I'm going to go into edit mode of this plank again. Actually no, stay in object mode. Press Shift and D to duplicate it. And right click to make it stay in the same position. Now let's go into edit mode. And with all the vertices of the new plank selected, press R and rotate it 90 degrees. And move it up to the top of the door. And we have a base shape here now. It's exactly like the other plank, but what we're going to do is just move some of the vertices around so we get a new shape for the top plank of the door frame. I'm going to move it over so that it's almost sitting on top of the plank, but there's a little bit of a gap in between. Alright, now we can start shaping this thing. So just move, I don't really know what it looks like under there. I didn't draw it, obviously. I mean, I drew the house itself, but I didn't draw exactly what that plank looks like. It's obstructed by this awning here. So I'm just going to move these around until I get a shape that I think looks half decent. Alright, so I made my top plank look something like that. Alright, now we just need one more and we're finished the door frame. So select the left plank again, press Shift and D, and move it over on the X-axis. And let's create the right plank. We're going to do the same thing we did with the top plank. Just going to move these around to get the shape we want. And we're going to stretch it taller so that it meets with the plank at the top. Again, leave a little gap between them. And I also don't really know what this plank looks like, so I'm just making it up as I go along. Alright. So, this is what my 3 planks for the door frame look like. Now that the door frame's done, we can create the door itself. Now to create the door, we're going to go into front view and make sure the cursor is still centered in the middle of the doorway. In object mode, press Shift and A, add a mesh plane. I'm going to delete the top 2 vertices, so we just have the 2 vertices at the bottom. And with those selected, I'm going to scale that in and move it down to the bottom of the door frame. Now when we're making the door, make sure to leave a little bit of space around the door, between the door and the door frame. Now, I'm going to press E to extrude that up just a little bit, and then we're going to scale it up, making sure to leave a little bit of space between the door and the door frame, and extrude that up again, and then scale those vertices up. And we're just going to keep extruding up and moving those vertices so that they match the shape of the door frame. Almost to the top. I'm going to rotate that so that we can match the top better. Now what I'm going to do so we can work with this better is go back into object mode. I'm going to select the house object and press H to hide that. So now we're just dealing with the door and the door frame. Now in front view, if you press the Z key and go into solid shaded view, you can see the gap between the door and the door frame. You can see at the top here we have a little bit too much of a gap. But we don't have any vertices there to match that curve. So what we're going to do is press Ctrl and R to add a vertical loop cut, like we see here, and use the scroll wheel to add maybe 5. We're going to add 5 cuts. Press left click and then left click again. And now we have a lot more vertices to work with at the top here. So just select each one and move it up to match the shape of the door frame. Just like that. Perfect. Alright, there's our door. Let's give some thickness to the door. So with all the vertices selected, in top view, extrude it back 1 blender unit. Or what was that? That was 0.1 blender units. Just extrude it back as thick as you want the door to be. Alright. Now the door's inset in the door frame just a little bit, just so we can see some of the door frame on the inside. Now let's add a quick doorknob. With the cursor still centered in the middle of the doorway, press Shift and A and add a mesh in top view. Press the S key, scale it down a little bit like that, and then press S and then Y to squish it. Now in front view, scale it down to the size you want the doorknob to be and place it on the right side of the door wherever you want it. You can see it's intersecting the door, so back in top view, zoom in, and let's move it so that it's not intersecting the door anymore. Let's sit it right on the door. It's just a quick doorknob. We're not going to go into great detail creating this. It's not going to be really seen when we create the final render. Alright, so the doorknob is complete. The last thing we need to do for it is to smooth it out. So bring up the toolbar on the left and press smooth. And we need to do that for the door frame as well. If you move the doorway, you can see that it has some flat shading going on. So we want to smooth those small angles. So in the side toolbar, press smooth shading for the door. And then in the modifiers buttons, add the edge split modifier for the door. Done. So now the curvy edges of the door are all smooth, but all the sharp angles stay sharp. Alright, press Alt and H to unhide the rest of the house, and let's see what we got. Hold Shift and select the second layer in the 3D header to bring the second layer into view. So first and second layer together look like this. Looking good so far. Now we're going to move on to the foundation of the house. So it's another layer beneath the regular house that has all this stone and mortar. So let's press the 1 key so that we're just seeing layer 1. Select the house object, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a floor for it. So go into edit mode, and in side view, side orthographic view, select all of the vertices at the bottom and press the F key. Now press Shift and D to duplicate that, right click, and then press the P key to separate it. Now select the new floor object we made, and in edit mode, in side view, move it down a few spaces, just a couple, so there's a little gap between this and the house. And now extrude it straight down on the Z-axis, just a little bit, just like that. Now you can see the little gap that's between this foundation and the house. Alright, so that takes care of the foundation. Now what we're going to do is we're going to stick some stones in it, just like in the design over here. So to create the stones for it, place the cursor away from the house just so we have an empty area to work with. Press Shift and A and add a mesh cube. In top view, I'm going to squish the cube this way, and I'm going to add a subsurf modifier by clicking on Add Modifier and going to Subdivision Surface. And I'm going to give that 3 subdivisions. Make sure you change render to 3 as well. Again, view levels are a level of subdivisions you see in the 3D view, and render levels are levels of subdivisions you see in the actual final render when you press F12. Alright, so this is going to be our first stone. Press W and select Subdivide to give it some more detail, and square it off a little bit. In front view, let's move that all the way to the right, and then in side view, let's move it to the right as well. I'm going to scale it down, kind of fit it right in there, and in front view, I'm going to move it so that it's intersecting the foundation of the house. So just like that. Now, I'm going to give myself some more room here. We're going to create maybe 10 stones and just place them randomly on the right side of this foundation. So, let's shape this. We don't want it to be perfectly square, so I'm going to squish it down like that and just take the corners and create a new shape with them. There. So I just moved the corners in a little bit, and I moved those vertices up a little bit, and it gives us a more natural looking stone. It's flat shaded right now, so press the T key to go in the side toolbar and press Smooth Shading. There's our first stone. Now we're going to duplicate that and rotate it and reshape it and place it all around the foundation. I'm going to scale it up a little bit, make it a little bit bigger. Press Shift and D to duplicate it, rotate it a bit, go into edit mode, give it a slightly different shape, and that's all we're going to do. We're just going to keep doing that. Select one of the stones, duplicate it, move it over, reshape it, maybe even scale it a little, and do that for the whole length of the side of the foundation. You don't have to make a different stone every time. Sometimes you can just take one of the stones, duplicate it, and rotate it. Now I'm selecting 3 or 4 at a time and just duplicating them and moving them down. Just keep the spacing somewhat even and make sure you cover as much of the side of the foundation as you want, but don't leave any suspicious gaps. Make sure it's very consistent. And make sure there's enough variety so people don't notice a pattern. Alright, that's one side of the foundation right there. Now I'm going to select all of these stones in object mode. And in top view, I'm going to press Shift and D to duplicate them. And I'm going to move them over on the x-axis to the other side. And go in front view and make sure that it's overlapping, or I mean that it's intersecting halfway. So the foundation is intersecting in the middle of all those stones. So now the left and right side of the house, the foundation both have stones. I mean, both sides of the foundation have stones. Now we need to move these stones in the front and the back as well. So let's do the same thing we just did. Use the B key, select all of the stones inside view. It actually still selects stones on both sides of the foundation, so rotate the view, press B key again, hold Alt, and select an entire group of those stones just so we have one side of the foundation stone selected. Now go into top view, press Shift and D to duplicate them, and rotate them 90 degrees, and let's move it to the front left of the house. Zoom in and make sure that it's halfway inside the house. And in front view, let's position it where we want it. And since the front of the house is longer than the sides, we're going to need to duplicate more of these stones to fill in the gap over here. So just select some of the stones, press Shift and D and move them over. Alright, now the front of the foundation has stones in it. Still in front view, use the B key to select all the stones in the foundation. Now in top view, duplicate them and move them to the back of the house, making sure that it's intersecting halfway. Alright, that does it for the foundation. Now what we're going to create is the corner beams of the house that hold up the roof. So select the foundation and go into edit mode and select the front right vertex at the bottom. Press Shift and S and select cursor to selected. So I'm basically just placing the cursor at the bottom right of the house so I can add a plane there to start creating our support beam. So back in object mode, go into top view, press Shift and A and add a mesh plane. Scale it down to the size that you want your support beam to be. And I'm going to move it a little bit more into the house like that. I don't want too much of it sticking out. So most of it's going to kind of be embedded in the corner of the house. So just like that. Now in front view, let's for a second go back into object mode by pressing Tab. and holding shift and selecting layer 2. We need to see where the end of the roof is so that we know where to extrude the support beam up to. So in front view now, go into tab of the support beam plane that we just created. Press extrude, and I'm just going to move this straight up to the top of the roof right there. And now press Ctrl and R to add a loop cut. And left click, and then we can move the loop. I'm going to move it to about right there. I'm going to move it in. Now we're going to start shaping this to conform with the shape of the house. So let's add another loop cut there. Move it in a little. And add a loop cut at the bottom there. Move that in a little. Now you notice the support beams have a bit of a size variation going on. It's a bit skinnier in the middle and fatter at the top and the bottom. We're going to create those variations after we've actually finished creating the support beam. So continue adding loop cuts and shaping this to conform with the curve of the house. That looks about right. Now we have to make the top meet the roof. So let's just move those vertices in like that. Move that over. So it should look like that. Alright, now we can create those size variations I was talking about. So select the middle vertices here, scale them in just a little bit, and select the vertices above that and scale them in. And then just keep doing that until you get the look that you want. I'm going to select the bottom vertices here and I'm going to scale them up to make this bottom end real fat. So you see it's fat at the bottom, it gets skinnier in the middle, and then a little bit bigger up towards the top here. I'm going to move these vertices manually. So just play with your support beam until you have a little bit of a shape like that. Looking good. Now again, we have some flat shading going on that we want to smooth out. So press the T key, select smooth shading, and add an edge split modifier. And we forgot to add an edge split modifier on the side of the house. We can see there's some flat shading going on there too. So let's press smooth shading on for that and add an edge split modifier for that. Excellent. Now select the support beam that we just created, and in top view, actually in side view, press Shift and D and move it over on the Y-axis to the other side. Just like that. Now we need to create some support beams on this side, but these are going to be a little bit different because this side of the house is shaped differently. But we're still going to select the front support beam there, and in front view, press Shift and D to duplicate it and move it all the way over there. And I'm going to delete the top portion of that. And I'm just going to use what we have here and reshape it instead of recreating it from scratch. So, you know the drill. Just move these vertices until they're in place and shaped with the house. And select the top vertices and make sure that they intersect with the rooftop. So I've created something that looks like that. I just deleted the top half of the beam that I duplicated, and I moved the top of that to line up with the roof tiles or the roof planks, and then I just shaped everything a little bit. Rotate the view around, sticking out from the house as much as you want it to. And now in top view, or actually in side view, again, press Shift and D and move that on the y-axis to the other side of the house. Alright, now our roof is sufficiently supported. And we have a stone foundation. Now all we need is a deck and this little closet, or whatever you want to call it, little shed on the side of the house. And of course the awning and these two posts. Now before we move on, there's one thing I'm going to do to make things a lot easier for us. In front view, I'm going to select everything, and since I've been using this red line as a guideline, I've been using that as the floor. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to move everything up on the z-axis until it's sitting on that red line. Now I can continue using that red line as the floor. The foundation kind of went beneath it. Now what we're going to do is move on to the deck. We're going to first create all the planks on top of the deck, and then we're going to create the foundation underneath it, and then the rocks holding it up, and then the front step. So this is going to be pretty easy. In top view, I'm going to place the cursor in front of the house about there. Press Shift and A and add a mesh plane. I'm going to squish it down to the shape of a plank. And in front view, I'm going to move it up right where the foundation meets the house. Maybe a little bit higher. And in edit mode, I'm going to press the E key and extrude all those vertices down about 0.1 blender units. Now we decide how much space we want on the deck. I'm going to select the right vertices there in side view, and I'm going to move it all the way over until it's actually going inside the house. And let's see, I think we need a little bit more space up top. So in side view, select the vertices on the end there. Let's move them to the left a little bit. Alright, that looks better. Now I think this plank is a little bit too wide. So in front view, with all the vertices selected, I'm going to press S and squash that on the x-axis. Also think it's a little bit too thick, so I'm going to select the bottom vertices and move them up a tiny bit. There we go. Now we have quite a few of these to make, and you can see that they all have a little bit of variation. So this is just, it's easy, but it can be a little time consuming depending on how much detail you want and how much variation on each plank that you want. But the first thing I'm going to do is move this all the way over on the x-axis to the end of the support beam right there. Now in top view, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Alright, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to press Control and R and add 6 loop cuts in the side of this plank. So left click and then right click to keep that all centered. And I'm going to add 3 vertical loop cuts in this plank by pressing Control and R again and using the mouse wheel or the scroll wheel to create 3 cuts. left click, and then right click to keep them centered. There we go. Now, I'm simply going to select a couple of the vertices on the side and give this its own unique shape. There, one plank done. So when you're finished with that plank, press Shift and D, move it over on the x-axis, leave a little gap between them, and go back into edit mode and create a different shape for this one. There we go, 2 planks done. Now I forgot to set smooth this, or to set this to smooth shading and add an edge split modifier. So let's do that real quick. So I'm actually going to select both of these objects and press smooth shading in the toolbar. Then add an edge split modifier to both of them. There we go. Alright, now we can continue creating the rest of our deck by duplicating one plank after another and giving it a different shape. Now I've created 5 different planks, and I'm not going to spend my time creating like 20 unique planks. So I'm going to select all the planks I just created, press Shift D, move them over just like that, and then I'm going to rotate them 180 degrees so that people won't be able to recognize the pattern. And the ends of these are kind of flat, so I'm going to modify them a bit. Alright. I'm going to select a few random planks, press Shift and D and move them over, and then move them into place beside each other. Whoops, looks like we don't need that last one. Move that over on the x-axis a little, just so it's closer to the edge of that support beam. And then I'm going to even out these gaps by moving these all over a little tiny bit. Just like that. So there's our deck. Add more variation, you can see that some of these planks are not even close to being as wide as some of the others. Some are fat and some are skinny. So let's do that. Let's select this one plank here. Let's make this a skinny one. So in edit mode, let's squish that down and move it over. And let's make this a fat one. So center that in between the gap and just stretch it out a little bit. And let's make another skinny one here. And let's make this a fat one. Just like that. Alright, that definitely added a good bit of extra detail. Now that we've got that created, let's create the foundation, which is this little plank underneath all of the top planks. This is going to be real simple. We're going to go into top view and add a mesh cube. We're going to scale this to the size we want the foundation to be. It's going to be slightly smaller than the planks on top of it, so that the planks are overlapping it. So I'm just scaling this and stretching it just like that. So you can see that it's slightly smaller all around than the planks on top of it. Now go into front view, or side view actually, and let's place it right beneath the planks, right there. And in edit mode, let's drag this up so that it's just the same thickness as the planks, maybe a little bit thicker. And let's move the back end here all the way into the foundation of the house. Alright, so there's the foundation for the deck. And this is going to be held up by two stones on the right side and the left side. Let's create them now. In top view again, add a mesh cube again. Let's move it to the left side. We'll start with the left stone. Scale that down. So that let's go into side view, easier to see. Scale it down so that it's the size, so that it's sized like that, where it's right below the foundation, but right above the green line, which is our ground. And let's go into the modifier buttons and add the modifier subdivision surface for this. Let's crank it up to 2 subdivisions. And right now it looks like a sphere. But if you go into edit mode, with all the vertices selected, press the W key and select subdivide. Now it's looking a little better. Let's press W key again and subdivide it once more. Alright, now it's just a square stone. We're going to play with this by turning on proportional vertex editing by pressing the O key. And now we can select these vertices and use the scroll wheel to change the radius and how it affects the surrounding vertices. And let's just create a shape. Let's smooth it out. Just selecting some of the bottom vertices here and stretching them a little. Some of the top vertices as well, and moving them down. We're creating a stone, and there's like an infinite variety of stone shapes that are possible. So just pull a couple vertices here and there until you get a stone, or until you get something that looks remotely like a stone. I think that's looking okay. Remember to use the scroll wheel to change the radius. And just play around. This is a fun part. This isn't supposed to be hard. Alright. I mean, that looks okay to me. There's a stone right there. Just when you're finished editing, make sure that the top of the stone meets with the foundation and the bottom of the stone meets with the ground. Now press the T key and select smooth shading for this. And in top view, I'm going to duplicate that and move it over to the right side. And I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. And let's see how that looks. Alright, I'm going to make some modifications to this. Remember to not just move vertices around. You can also press the S key and scale them to create variation, or even the R key to rotate. There I scaled the entire bottom of the stone in to kind of round it off, make it less square than the other one. Alright, I'm done with this, but again, make sure that the top and bottom, make sure the top meets with the foundation of the deck and the bottom meets with the ground. Alright, our deck is now supported. All that's left now is the front step. To create the front step, I'm going to just steal one of the planks from the top, press Shift and D, move it down about there, press R to rotate it 90 degrees, and in front view I'm going to center it with the front of the door because that's where the front step's going to be aligned with. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to move it down right beneath the foundation of the deck. And in top view, I'm going to squish that down on the x-axis. And we're going to go into edit mode and reshape it a little bit. Alright, and now let's tuck this right underneath the deck. So in top view, I'm going to move that back, tuck it underneath just like that. And I'm going to stretch it out on the y-axis so that it has a bit more space to step on it. And now let's create the foundation for the step. We're basically going to do the same thing. We're going to add a box underneath it. But first, you can see that this has been stepped on so many times that it's kind of indented from all the feet being pressed into it. So with proportional vertex editing still on, I'm going to select the front 4 vertices there, press the G key, and I'm just going to move them down. And I'm going to change the radius so that it affects more of the vertices around it, and create that indent. Just a little bit. There we go. Alright, now we can throw a box underneath it. Now in top view, place the cursor over the step, press Shift and A, and add a mesh cube. Scale the cube down so that it's a little bit smaller than the stair. Something like that. And in front view, let's position it. Or in side view, let's position it. Move it up until it intersects with the stair. And in edit mode, bring the bottom of it up until it's sitting on the ground line, which is the green axis. And there we go. You can see that it might be poking out, might be poking up through the stair because of how the stair indents. We're going to fix that by pressing Ctrl and R in front view and adding a vertical loop cut. So press Ctrl and R and then left click twice to place that loop cut there. And now select those two top vertices there and press G and then Z to move it down on the Z axis a little bit into the step like that, just to make sure that that's not popping up through the stair. Alright, we're finished with the deck. Now we're going to move on to the awning and the support beams for that. Before we move on to the awning, I noticed one thing that I wanted to change real quick. I made the door a little bit smaller in the model than it was in the design. And because of the giant window up top here, it kind of makes the proportions look a little goofy. So I'm just going to scale everything up here. And let's do that by selecting all the wooden planks for the door frame, the doorknob, and the door itself. And just press S to scale that up. And I'm going to zoom in, and here's the planks from the deck. So I'm going to move these straight up so that there's a little gap between the door and the planks. So that's seated well now. And now I'm going to select the house and make sure that the doorway we cut out, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger because you can see that it's a little bit small here. So the door is actually going through it. So I'm just going to stretch that out. Whoops, let's turn proportional vertex editing off by pressing the O key. And I'm just going to move the vertices of the doorway so that there's a bigger hole there for the door frame and the door. There we go. Alright, how's that look? That's a little better. Alright, now let's work on the awning. The awning is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to add a circle, or we're going to add a cylinder, delete the bottom half of it, and then just move it back, because each one of these little things here is basically half of a log, or half of a cylinder. So let's place the cursor right above the doorway, right there. Press Shift and A, and add a mesh cylinder. Now go into edit mode. I'm going to scale that down, and I'm going to delete the bottom half of those vertices by using the border select tool, and then press X to delete them. Alright, so we're working with this right now. I'm going to scale it down to the size I want these logs to be. I guess something like that looks good. And I'm also going to squish it on the Z-axis by pressing S and then Z, so that it's less round and more of an oval shape. Now in side view, I'm going to align this. I want the front of this log to be almost to the end of the deck, but not quite to the end. So that looks good. And let's select the back end of this and move all those vertices to the right on the Y-axis. Just move it straight into the house. Good. Now I'm going to select all 4 of the bottom vertices of this log and press the F key to make a face there. And using the B key, I'm going to select the front end of this, and with those vertices selected, I'm going to press the F key to make that a face. There, now it's solid. And let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 of these. So we're going to have 1 in the center and 2 off to the sides. So before we duplicate this, press the T key and choose Smooth Shading. And let's add an edge split modifier like we normally do for objects like this. Now the sharp angles remain sharp. Alright, we have 1 of these now. And when we rotate it, you can see that the origin point is kind of off center. And I want to fix that because when we duplicate these, we're going to be rotating it a little bit to create a bit of an arch. And it's just easier when the origin point is centered to the geometry. So press the T key for the sidebar again, and choose Origin, and select Geometry to Origin. There we go. Now let's move that over the doorway, right where we want it, right in the center. And now get rid of the toolbar and press Alt and D for a link duplicate. That way, if we want to modify this, we'll only need to change 1 instead of changing all 5. And now I'm going to move it over to the right, and I'm going to rotate it a little bit. And I'm going to make the bottom pretty much touch the one next to it. Press Alt and D again to make another link duplicate. Move that over and make that touch. And rotate it down a little bit. So we've got ourselves a nice little arch going. Whoops. I forgot all these moved once we center the geometry to the origin, so I'm going to select them all again in side view and move them to the right back into the house. Perfect. Alright, let's do the same thing with the left side. Press Alt and D, move it over, and rotate it. I'm just eyeing it up. I'm not rotating it any certain number of degrees. Alt and D again, rotate it, and we're finished our arch, our awning. I feel like I need a little bit more of an arch, so I'm going to rotate things a little bit more. Alright, once we're done playing with these, let's create the posts that hold them up. And they're just simply cylinders. Go in top view, press Shift and A in object mode, and add a mesh circle. And in edit mode, let's scale it down and let's place it on the right side of the awning. Now in front view, where are we at? There it is. Let's move it into the awning, scale it down a little bit more, and press the E key to extrude it, and extrude it down on the Z axis, straight down into the deck. There we go. Press the T key for the sidebar, and let's turn smooth shading on. So here's one post. Now it looks a little bit plain, it's just a straight up and down cylinder. Let's add some variation by adding some loop cuts and then moving the vertices around. So in edit mode, press Ctrl and R until you see that pink circle in the middle. Then use the scroll wheel to make, I don't know, 5 or 6 cuts. Left click and then you can move it up and down, or you can right click to keep everything centered. Now just select a circle or two and move them around, rotate them a little bit, scale them up and down. Just something that gives it a little bit more variation to it so it doesn't look perfect. But make sure it doesn't intersect through the top like it's doing right there. Make sure it's not poking through. Keep it inside that one, what are we going to call that? One log. Alright, that looks fine to me. Now before we make the second post, we're actually going to create the rope that goes around this. And then we're going to duplicate them both together and move them over, just to save ourselves some work. Alright, now to create the rope, what we're going to do is first isolate this post by pressing the backslash key, or forward slash key, whatever it is, on the numpad for local view. And now, to make sure that the cursor is centered in the middle of this post, because that's exactly where we need it, go into edit mode, select all of the vertices, press Shift and S, and select cursor to selected. Now it looks like it already was centered, but just in case it wasn't, make sure you center that 3D cursor in the middle of all that geometry. So let's get out of edit mode. And now let's press Shift and A to add a mesh circle. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this circle and we're going to use the screw modifier to wrap it around the pole going up. Now the reason we need the origin point of the circle right in the center of the post is because that's going to be the rotation point that the screw modifier uses. It's going to screw this around in circles based on the origin. You'll see what I mean in a second. So in edit mode of the circle, let's scale that down to the thickness of the rope that we want and move it to the right side of the post. Let's make that a little bit thinner. And move it to the side of the post where it's basically touching it. Now this circle is going to wrap around the origin point and it's going to screw up. It's going to go up in a spiral. And we're going to do that with a screw modifier. So with your circle sized and being next to the post with its origin in the center of the post, go to the modifier buttons, select add modifier, and choose screw. Alright, you'll see it kind of screwed on the wrong axis. So we can change that by simply changing the axis in this option here. So change it from Z-axis to Y-axis. There we go. Now it's going in the right direction. But we need to add some screw value, because right now it's at 0, 0, so it's just going to go around in a perfect circle instead of coil. So let's change the screw value from 0 to 0.1. Now you can see it's starting to coil up, but it's only going around 360 degrees. We can change that by changing the number of iterations. So change that number from 1 to, I don't know, 7 looks okay. This rope is a little bit thick, so I'm going to go back into edit mode and scale down that circle to get the thickness I want. And I'm going to move it closer to the post. That looks better. Maybe a little bit thinner. And you can see it change in real time as you're scaling it. Now it's looking way too much like a spring. We need to bring this a little bit closer together. So change the screw value from 0.1 to 0.04. That looks a little bit too close now. Let's try 0.045. Alright, let's try 0.05. Yeah, I'm down with that. That looks good. Alright, cool. We have some rope coiled around the post now. Well, we have these loose ends. What we're going to do is when you go into edit mode, you can see that it's really only a circle in this object. All of this is part of the modifier, but we can apply it so that we can actually modify all of these coils manually. So let's just click on the apply button in the modifier. Now when you go into edit mode, you can see that it's a real object now. It's not just a modifier. So hold Alt and right click on one of the edges on the last circle there and just rotate the view a little so that you can move it into the post and move it down under the rope. So we just kind of tucked it in there. And let's do the same with the bottom circle. Hold Alt and right click to select all of those edges. Move it into the post and move it up under the rope. And tuck that in. Just like that. Alright, good. Now it's kind of a really perfect coil. I want to create some variation to that. So we're going to use proportional vertex editing again, just like we've done before on all the planks and whatever else we made. So go back into edit mode and let's turn proportional vertex editing on by pressing the O key. You can also turn it on from the header in this icon here. Left click on that and you'll have all your proportional vertex editing options: enable, disable, projected 2D, and connected. So just turn it on for now. We're actually going to change the type of proportional vertex editing we use, but I'm going to show you the difference. So with that turned on, let's just select one of the vertices at the bottom, press the O key, move it down. You can see that, I mean, it's working as we expect it to. It's affecting all the vertices within the radius, but it's keeping all of the rope coils together. I kind of just want to tug at one length of rope and not affect the coils of rope above it. We can do that by changing it from enable to the connected option. That way it's only going to affect vertices connected to it. So, I mean, if you increase the radius to a large degree or to a larger level, you'll see that it starts to bring down the other coils of rope. But this is a much more local way of using proportional vertex editing. And in a situation like this, it's definitely ideal. So now we can move these lengths of rope around. So just select a vertex here and there and push it or pull it just to give some variation like that. Maybe some gaps in the rope like we see there. And just pull it out so that there's different lengths in the profile. Just experiment and have fun. This is the more easy part of the tutorial, where you're just kind of going through and messing things up. Again, all I did was just rotate the view, I pull a couple of the ropes out to loosen it up a little, and I pushed them up or down a little to create some gaps between them. Everything was just looking a little too perfect. Now once we're finished with that, make sure we turn proportional vertex editing off by pressing the O key or by going to the menu and selecting disable. And there we have our post. Now press the / key on the numpad to go back to regular view. And with those two objects selected, press Shift and D to duplicate it and move it over to the left. And now I'm going to go into top view and I'm going to rotate that 180 degrees. Now first I'm going to press the T key, select the origin option, and select, what do I want here? Origin to geometry. So that's going to center the origin point for each of those objects. So now we can rotate it in place, because when I was rotating it, it was kind of moving its position too. So once we do that, press the R key again, hold Control, and rotate it 180 degrees. Alright, we have our posts and we have our awning. We are almost finished. One thing left to do is make the shed on the right side, which is going to be very easy. So let's go to side view and let's place the cursor right there on the side of the house. Press Shift and A and add a mesh cube. Let's go in the front view and see what happened to that. Aha, it's inside the house. I'm going to move that over to the right. And I'm going to stretch this out tall so that it's sitting on the red line too. And in edit mode, I'm going to bring this in. And in side view, I'm going to select all the vertices. And I'm going to squish it on the y-axis. Alright. And I'm going to move it on the x-axis until it's intersecting the house. So it's sort of inside the house and the foundation a little. And in front view, you can see that this shed kind of slopes down a little. So I'm going to select these two vertices on the end there and move them straight down to create that slant. I feel like it's a little bit too wide. So in side view, I'm going to select all the vertices again and squish it on the y-axis. And now to get the lid for it, or to get the top of it, whatever that thing is, I'm going to select all 4 of the vertices on the top, press Shift and D to duplicate, press S to scale it, and in front view, press the E key to extrude it. And you'll see Blender kind of guess what path you want to extrude it on. Since our selection was at an angle, Blender is going to automatically extrude it on that angle. And in this case, it works out perfect. So when you press E, extrude it up diagonally like that. Just a little bit. Left click to confirm. And there's our finished shed. I press Control and up to make the 3D view full screen, so we can see our completed house in all of its glory. Before we set this up for a quick render, now's the time we can go through the scene and see if there's anything that we want to tweak or change. One of the things that I want to change is the jaggedness of this rope. It's very low detail right now. So I'm simply going to add a subsurf modifier by pressing Control and 2. If you press Control and up to get out of full screen mode, you'll see that in the modifiers section, or in the modifiers window, you'll see that pressing Control and 2 automatically adds a subsurf modifier at level 2 for us. So let's select the other rope coil, and again press Control and 2. That's not numpad 2, that's actually just from the number row. So press Control and regular 2, and it will automatically add a subsurf modifier for you at level 2. Alright, that fixes that, and let's see if there's anything else we want to fix. I want to fix this step. I kind of want to stretch it further back underneath the deck. So in side view, I'm going to select the top of the stair and select the back end of it. And just move it back under the foundation more. And I'm going to select the base of the stair select the back end of that, and also move that back more. There. Alright, now we can set this up for a quick render. We're actually going to be adding materials and textures for a full render in the next volume in the extras section. But right now this was just a modeling exercise. But you want something that looks cool in the end, so we're going to set it up with some simple lighting, an ambient occlusion, and render out a cool scene. To do that, we'll start by picking our camera view. So right-click on the camera to select it, press Control and numpad 0 to go into camera view, and press R twice so we can rotate it, press the G key, and then the middle mouse click to zoom out. Let's position that right where we want it, and press G and then Z to move it down lower so that it's closer to ground level. Press R twice to rotate it up. Alright, now it's looking like something. Press G and then middle mouse click to zoom in. And just move the camera right where you want it and rotate it for the exact shot that you want. That looks good enough to me. Alright. I'm going to center it a little bit better. I'm using the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. The boundary here, this orange line, everything inside this box is what gets rendered. Alright, scene is centered, got the perfect angle, we're ready to render. So for the hell of it, let's just quickly press F12 and see what we got. There is one light in the scene, but this is probably going to look like crap. Just press F12 real quick. And yeah, it looks like crap. Press the escape key. And let's keep this light, but let's move it over to the left side of the house, over here. Right about there. And since it doesn't illuminate the whole scene, we're going to need some extra lighting. So let's go into the World tab, or the World buttons, which is this little globe icon. And let's enable ambient occlusion. And leave it on add mixing, or leave it on the add option, so that it adds lighting to the scene. Now let's press F12 again and see what we got. Now that's looking so much better. I don't like how the shadow is being casted too far to the side though. So press the escape key, and in front view, let's move the lamp all the way up so that it's like the sun in the sky. If you press F11, you can see your previous render, and you can see everything's really grainy. Let's fix that. And it's also very small. So I'm confident our next render is going to be the perfect render. So what I'm going to do is in the World button still, under the Gather panel, change samples from 5 to 12. Basically, leaving this at a low number is going to give you graininess because there's going to be less time to calculate all the light bouncing everywhere. If you crank samples up to 12 or even higher, you're going to have a much more smoother scene and less grain. So I like to keep it at 12. There's still a tiny bit of grain, but it still renders fairly quickly. And now let's go to the render options, which is this little camera icon. Let's change the resolution from 50% to 100% to render out the full scene, to render out at full size, and change anti-aliasing from 8 to 16. Anti-aliasing is an option that smooths out the edges. If you turn that off, you're going to have really jagged edges, and if you crank it up to 16, you're going to have as good of edges as you can get. But it does slow down the render time. So I placed the samples in the world to 12 and anti-aliasing to 16. And this should give us our full render. So Press F12. And let's just let this render. Alright, the render's complete. You can middle mouse click and pan this around to see how everything looks. And you can use the scroll wheel to zoom out. And I think it looks awesome. And press numpad 1 to get full size again. If you like what you see, press F3 and you can save that image. Toon House. And that will do it for this chapter.